On Government Orders of the Day, numbers 2 through to 4.
Vulnerable Children Bill, third reading. Children, Young Persons and Their Families Vulnerable Children Amendment Bill, third reading. Kiwi Saver Vulnerable Children Amendment Bill, third reading.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Minister Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Vulnerable Children Bill, the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Vulnerable Children Amendment Bill and the Kiwi Saver Vulnerable Children Amendment Bill be now read a third time. Mr Speaker, in this country, from the moment a child is born or even conceived, the government is there to provide support for them, their parents and their wider family. We have free education and our schools are the envy of many countries. Good healthcare is available and affordable. Currently, our under sixes can go to the doctor for free, and from next year that will include every child under 13. On a broader level, our kids can pretty much play any sport or musical instrument that they choose. They can aspire to the highest levels of government or business or anything they want, no matter their gender, sexuality, ethnicity or their background. We seem to have all the right settings for our children to grow into happy, healthy adults who aspire to achieve great things. However, we have problems in this country which, despite decades of attention and funding, have not changed for the better for too many of our children. In our country, child abuse is a shameful problem that every New Zealander has a stake in. On average, around 8 children each year die as a result of abuse, neglect or assault. Many more are found by Child, Youth and Family to have been abused or neglected, with nearly 23,000 substantiated cases of abuse or neglect just in the last financial year. There are also a significant number of children in circumstances that put them at really serious risk of harm. The costs to the country are significant. The costs to children are simply unacceptable. I've been the Minister of Social Development since 2008, and every single day the needs of these very children have been at the forefront of the work that we have done. The faces of the children and adults that I have met who have shared their shocking, sickening and horrific stories are with me and many New Zealanders every day. I remember the 6-year-old who was proudly showing me around one of our facilities and who paused at the door of the bedroom and took a deep breath and reminded herself that actually bed can be a safe place. I remember the wonderfully eccentric man at the Wellington City Mission who took me through his life story, and after half an hour of talking I could trace his lifetime of pain and suffering back to his horrendous child abuse as a child. So where were we? Where was the government? Where were other New Zealanders then, and for people like him? So in 2012 we launched the White Paper for Vulnerable Children and the Children's Action Plan, which set out an extensive package of reforms to address child abuse and neglect in New Zealand. The reforms would be nothing without the close to 10,000 submissions from New Zealanders. This bill is a critical step in giving effect to the changes in the Children's Action Plan. These include ensuring joint accountability across justice, health, education, police and social development for the well-being of vulnerable children. They also include the new requirements for the screening and vetting of government workers and contractors who work with children. All up, these new requirements will cover around 182,000 New Zealanders. There are also new workforce restrictions to prevent those with serious convictions who pose a danger to children from coming into contact with them. The legislation will also switch the onus on parents who have killed or severely abused or neglected a child, and they will now have to prove they are safe to parent subsequent children. But let me be very clear, this legislation contained in these bills is a small part of the work that is already underway and that it has to be done under the Children's Action Plan. We can pass laws to improve screening and vetting. We can pass laws that place restrictions on dangerous people where there currently are none, but we cannot pass laws that stop children being beaten, neglected or sexually and emotionally abused. I believe anyone in this House would have done that plenty of times over if they could have. We cannot pass laws that stop children being killed by those who should love and protect them. We cannot expect that throwing more money at this problem without changing how we work will actually fix anything. And accepting that this is as good as it gets for those children is simply not good enough. So that's where this Children Action Plan, of which the Vulnerable Children's Bill is just one part, will make a difference. It is multidimensional, cross-agency and community-driven. It is more than 30 interwoven initiatives, and it will bring the right people together in communities around our vulnerable kids. It will give us the whole lot more options to respond to the different needs of these most vulnerable children. Firstly, we want to support vulnerable children and work alongside their families to keep them safe so that they never reach the point where they need the involvement of child, youth and family. This is very much trying to get in early to prevent that really serious abuse and neglect. That's where our new children's teams come in, along with the new hub that takes the notifications from both the public, police and other organisations, and then plugs it into the Vulnerable Kids Information System to then make sure there is that follow-through on who is intervening, at what level and where. They work with children and young people who are vulnerable, but are best helped outside of child, youth and families statutory service. As well as doctors, teachers, social workers, there is Plunkett, Family Start, whānau ora, parenting services, iwi services and budgeting, to name but a few. But too often vulnerable children are still at the back of the queue when trying to access these services. It makes absolutely no sense that they are the children that need it most, but because their parents either are unable to advocate for them or do not have the skills to do it, they are always, it seems, at the back of the queue, and we fight to get them at the front. I've had enough. New Zealanders have had enough. This bill will mean that joint accountability across chief executives will change the whole dynamic throughout our agencies. And that is, for me, a big start in what really needs to be done. We have to back up the work of what is happening on the ground. Too often it is government following the lead of communities, but actually that's fine, but more often we're actually a barrier to the work that could be done in accessing services for these very children. The children's teams understand the unique needs of each child they deal with. They then have direct access to the services, whether it is health, justice, social work, housing, and they can fast-track these most vulnerable children through that system. The support also goes to their parents where it needs to be. So if we have mothers and fathers with mental health issues, with drug and alcohol issues, with having problems finding work, we can make sure that they get access to those sorts of services as well. Our two pilot teams in Rotorua and Whangarei have worked with over 110 children so far, and we are hearing about better attendance at health appointments, better parenting, re-enrolments at early childhood and school, better access to welfare support, happier children, better behaviour and reduced offending. It's been a lot of learning and some hurdles along the way, and I think there's going to be a whole lot more. But it is clear that the mix of services and that early support is, Mr Speaker, what will make some of the biggest difference. I want to thank the Social Services Committee. I really want to thank all those officials that have put so much of not just their professional time, but I know so much of their personal time into this, because they saw it as that important and stayed late and worked over Christmas and did all those sorts of things, and I'm really cognisant of it and so extremely grateful. But I think most of all I want to thank New Zealanders for actually giving attention to these children, not just when there is a horrific case. Too often we turn our attention to them when there is a name and a face that we can put it to, and I understand that and I do it myself, but I think we have to care about them every day. So I thank the House and those members that are supporting the bill. I will treat that with the respect that I know it deserves, and so for that I commend it to the House. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it is a pleasure to rise and speak to the third reading of the Vulnerable Children Bill, and I congratulate the Minister for bringing the bill